quiet struggles of women in Victorian homes. The house on Belgrave Square awoke not to sunlight, but to the clatter of a coal scuttle. That was the first sound, always. A metallic, gritty percussion against the iron hearth in the basement kitchen, announcing that another day of respectable suffering had begun. For Eleanor Hardwick, lying perfectly still beneath a canopy of cream-colored damask, the sound was a small anchor, dragging her back from the vague, lavender-scented country of dreams to the more exacting geography of her life. She did not move. To move would be to acknowledge the hour, and to acknowledge the hour was to begin the slow, meticulous process of becoming Mrs. Arthur Hardwick. The woman in the bed, the one with the loose braid of auburn hair snaking across the pillow, the one with the faint crease beside her mouth that only appeared when she frowned in sleep. That woman had a few precious minutes left. Eleanor allowed herself to count the familiar sounds. The distant hiss of the gas mantle being lit in the servants' hall, the soft thud of the range door, the whisper of skirts on the stone floor of the corridor below. Her husband Arthur slept on beside her, a still solid presence. His breathing was deep and even, a metronome of masculine satisfaction. His day did not begin with a list of failures. His day began with the assumption of success. She turned her head a fraction on the pillow, watching the first gray light filter through the heavy velvet curtains. The room was a museum of her own supposed happiness. The vast carved wardrobe contained her uniforms, the walking dress for the park, the afternoon dress for calls, the dinner gown for the performance of dining with a man who had ceased to see her across the table 3 years ago. The dressing table held silver-backed brushes, crystal bottles of eau de cologne, a hand-painted tray for her jewelry, all the props. She was an actress in a one-woman play, and the audience was everywhere and nowhere. At 7 o'clock, the door connecting to the dressing room opened a crack. A small, nervous face appeared. Mary, her maid, whose entire existence was calibrated to the management of Eleanor's exterior. "Good morning, ma'am," Mary whispered, as if Arthur were a sleeping dragon. Eleanor pushed herself up, the pillows plumping behind her. She smiled. It was the first performance of the day, and it was essential to get it right. "Good morning, Mary. Is the water warm?" "Nearly, ma'am. Cook had a difficulty with the boiler." Of course she did, Eleanor thought. There is always a difficulty. But she nodded gravely, as if the state of the boiler was a matter of genuine concern, not the monotonous drumbeat of domestic chaos she was expected to manage but never complain about. The ritual began. Mary drew back the curtains, revealing a sky the color of old pewter. London from this height was a respectable city of chimney pots and soot, a sepia photograph of commerce and industry. The bathroom, with its copper tub and ever of hot water, was a brief sanctuary. For 20 minutes, Eleanor was simply a body being washed. The water, scented with lilac, erased the stiffness of night. She could close her eyes and imagine she was elsewhere on a windswept moor, or walking a cliff path, or simply sitting in a room with a book, uninterrupted. But the water cooled, and Mary returned with towels as warm as breath. Then came the armor, coarse at first. Mary pulled the laces with practiced efficiency, and Eleanor gripped the brass footboard of the bed, breathing in sharp, shallow gasps as her ribs were gently but irrevocably compressed. The shape was familiar now, the wasp waist, the pushed-up bosom, the silhouette of the ideal Victorian woman. It was not uncomfortable precisely. It was more profound than discomfort. It was a philosophy applied to flesh. Contain yourself, the corset said. Hold yourself in. You are not a creature of appetite or expansion. You are a vessel, and vessels have fixed dimensions. Then the chemise, the petticoats, 3 of them, each adding a rustling layer of restriction, the stocking suspenders, the cage crinoline, a wickerwork bell of steel and tape that swung around her hips. The morning dress was a deep serviceable claret, high-necked, with buttons from throat to hem. Each button was a small pearl-headed fastener, and as Mary's fingers worked down the row, Eleanor felt herself being sealed into her role. "Your hair, ma'am," Mary said. They had tried for 20 minutes to achieve the necessary arrangement. A twist at the crown, a roll over each ear, a cascade of ringlets at the back, a confection of order and artful chaos that proclaimed leisure, breeding, and a complete absence of the need to do anything useful. Eleanor's hair was thick and rebellious, forever escaping its pins. It was, she sometimes thought, the only honest part of her. At last, she descended the main staircase. The house was waking properly now. In the dining room, the sideboard groaned under silver cloches. Arthur was already there, standing by the window, reading the Times. He did not look up when she entered. That was not a cruelty. It was simply the architecture of their marriage. He was the sun, she was the moon. He emitted light, she reflected it. "Good morning, Arthur," she said, taking her seat at the opposite end of the long mahogany table. The table could seat 16. Between them lay a no-man's land of cut glass and white linen. "Morning," he said, turning a page. The paper crackled. She poured herself a cup of tea from the silver pot. The toast was in a silver rack, already cold. The eggs were under a silver dome, already congealed. She ate a single piece of toast, chewing slowly, while Arthur read aloud a paragraph about the progress of the railway in India. He did not require a response. He was sharing information, as one might hang a painting on a wall, for the wall to receive it, not to comment upon it. When he finished his eggs and kidneys, he folded the paper precisely, tucked it under his arm, and stood. He walked the length of the table, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her forehead. He did not. He touched the back of her chair, a brief, impersonal pressure. "I shall be late tonight, the Emerson dinner." "Of course," Eleanor said. "Wear the green silk. It suits you." "Yes, Arthur." He was gone. The front door closed with a solid, final thud. The house settled into the particular silence of a woman alone in a space that was not her own. The management of things, hers. Eleanor did not go back to her breakfast. She went, instead, to the morning room, a smaller, south-facing chamber designed for feminine pursuits. A writing desk held her correspondence. A rosewood work table held the embroidery she had not touched in 6 months. A bookshelf held 3 novels, a volume of Tennyson, a prayer book, and a manual on household management. She sat at the writing desk and stared at the blank page before her. She was supposed to write letters, thank you notes for dinners, invitations to teas, condolence notes for deaths she had not mourned, congratulations for births she would not celebrate. The currency of a woman's life was paper. She exchanged it for the illusion of connection. But today she wrote nothing. She took a fresh sheet, thick, cream-laid paper, watermarked with the Hardwick crest, and she began to draw. Not a picture. A list. She looked at the list. Then she tore the paper into tiny, indecipherable pieces and dropped them into the fireplace. The fire was not lit. It was only April, but she watched the scraps of paper lie there like fallen leaves, a small graveyard of forbidden truths. The door opened. Mrs. Pemberton, the housekeeper, stood on the threshold. Mrs. Pemberton was a woman of 50, built like a galleon under full sail, broad, solid, and impossible to tip. She had managed the Hardwick household for 18 years. She knew where the spare keys were kept, which maids were honest, which tradesmen overcharged, and how to remove a red wine stain from Persian carpet. She also knew, Eleanor suspected, every secret in the house. "The menus for the week, ma'am," Mrs. Pemberton said, holding out a leather-bound book. Eleanor took it. The daily struggle between economy and appearance was written in Mrs. Pemberton's neat, cramped hand. Monday, roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, stewed carrots, boiled potatoes. Tuesday, lamb cutlets, mashed turnips, cauliflower in white sauce. Wednesday, leftovers remade as a cottage pie. Thursday, fish sole. If the fishmonger had it, haddock if not. Sauce anglais. Creamed spinach. Friday, soup mock turtle, cold meats, pickles. Saturday, a formal dinner for 8. Soup, fish, entree chicken and aspic, roast haunch of venison, sweets, savories, cheese. Sunday, cold collation after church. Eleanor approved each menu with a small tick. She had no real say. The food was dictated by season, budget, and Arthur's preferences. Her role was to validate the decisions already made. It was a form of governance that required no governing. "The accounts, ma'am," Mrs. Pemberton added, producing a second book. Eleanor opened it. Coal, candles, soap, sugar, tea, flour, butter, milk, eggs, meat, fish, poultry, game, wine, spirits, ale, soda water, beeswax for the floors, blacking for the boots, starch for the collars, vinegar for the pickling, mustard for the table, rice, sago, tapioca, currants, raisins, almonds, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves. The list went on. She added columns of figures in her head, quickly, accurately. She had a natural gift for mathematics, a secret she guarded as carefully as her list of forbidden truths. Arthur believed women were incapable of abstract reasoning. He had told her so on their wedding night, in the tone of a man sharing a meteorological observation. "The butcher's bill is up by 7 shillings, she said. "He claims the price of beef has risen, ma'am." "It has not." "Send John to the Smithfield market on Thursday morning. Buy directly from the wholesaler and have it delivered. The butcher will lower his price by Monday." Mrs. Pemberton's expression did not change. "Very good, ma'am." This was the extent of Eleanor's power. She could save 6pence on a pound of beef. She could prevent the waste of candle ends. She could argue with the greengrocer about the price of asparagus. But she could not leave the house without a male escort. She could not open a bank account in her own name. She could not attend a lecture on astronomy because the lecturer had declared the event for gentlemen only. She could not, if Arthur died tomorrow, inherit the house or the furniture or the silver, which would all go to Arthur's eldest living male relative, a cousin in Dorset she had met twice and disliked both times. "Contain yourself," the corset whispered. "Hold yourself in. The duty of calls." At 2:30, Eleanor put on her walking dress, a dove-gray merino wool trimmed with black velvet ribbon. She added a hat, a confection of straw and silk flowers that perched on her head like a nervous bird. She added gloves, white kid, buttoned to the wrist. She added a small velvet reticule containing her card case, a handkerchief, and a vinaigrette, in case she encountered a smell unpleasant enough to require fainting, though she had never fainted in her life. The carriage was waiting. The groom helped her up the iron step. She settled onto the cushioned seat, and the horses began their slow, plodding progress through the streets of Belgravia. The journey was always the same, past the church, past the garden square, with its plane trees and wrought iron railings, past the houses of people she knew and people she did not. All of them identical in their red brick respectability. The carriage stopped. The groom knocked on a door. A maid appeared. Eleanor handed over a card. The maid disappeared. The carriage moved to the next house. Mrs. Henry Cartwright, not at home. Lady Agnes Finch, not at home. Mrs. Reginald Thorpe, at home. At Mrs. Thorpe's house, Eleanor was shown into a drawing room identical to her own, except for the color of the wallpaper sage green instead of rose and the arrangement of the furniture. Mrs. Thorpe, Clarissa to her friends, though Eleanor was not certain she was a friend, rose from a velvet settee and extended both hands. "Eleanor, how lovely! I was just saying to Reginald that we never see you anymore. Tea? Please." They sat. A maid brought a tray. Clarissa poured. The tea was too strong. Eleanor added a lump of sugar and stirred slowly, watching the liquid darken. "Have you heard about the Willoughbys?" Clarissa asked, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "No," Eleanor said. She had heard about the Willoughbys from Mrs. Pemberton, who had heard it from the cook, who had heard it from the butcher's boy, who had heard it from the Willoughbys' housemaid. But the ritual required her to be ignorant. "She has run off with the riding master?" "No." "Yes, left a note and everything. The children are with the grandparents. He is prostrate. Prostrate, I tell you." Eleanor imagined Mr. Willoughby, a fat, red-faced man with a habit of clearing his throat, being prostrate. The image did not move her. She imagined Mrs. Willoughby, a thin, bird-like woman with anxious eyes, running. That image did move her. She felt a flicker of something that might have been envy if she were less disciplined. "How shocking," Eleanor said. "Isn't it? I told Reginald, I said, 'Reginald, that's what comes of letting women have ideas above their station.' The riding master, a servant. Can you imagine?" Eleanor could imagine. She imagined it with a vividness that made her tea taste like ashes. A man who smelled of horses and leather, who spoke with an accent, who had strong hands and no opinions about the proper way to fold a napkin. A man who might look at her as if she were a woman, not a piece of furniture. "It is a tragedy," Eleanor said, "for the children." Clarissa nodded sagely. "For the children, yes. For Mr. Willoughby, of course, but the woman, well, she was always a little odd, don't you think? The way she read so much. Novels, you know. It fills a woman's head with nonsense." Eleanor's copy of Jane Eyre was hidden in the bottom of her wardrobe, wrapped in a shawl. She had read it 3 times. The first time she had wept. The second time she had been angry. The third time she had understood that Jane's escape was a fantasy, a fiction within a fiction. No governess ever married her employer. No plain woman ever won the tortured hero. And no respectable wife ever ran away with the riding master, not really. She simply disappeared into a fog of gossip and became a cautionary tale. "I should be going," Eleanor said, placing her cup on the tray. "So many calls to make." Clarissa kissed the air beside Eleanor's cheek. "Come again soon. And do bring Arthur to our dinner on the 23rd. Reginald so enjoys his company." "Of course he does," Eleanor thought as she walked back to the carriage. "They can discuss business and politics and the inferiority of women while we sit in the drawing room and discuss the inferiority of other women. The carriage continued its rounds. Mrs. Charles Bellingham, not at home. The Dowager Countess of Ashworth, at home, but receiving only family. Miss Amelia Finch, at home. Miss Amelia Finch was 74 years old, a spinster who had outlived her parents, her brothers, and most of her contemporaries. She lived in a small house on a side street, attended by a single elderly maid. She was not required to make calls or receive them, because she had no social position left to maintain. She was, in the eyes of Belgravia, a ghost who had forgotten to leave. But Eleanor always stopped at Miss Finch's house. She did not hand over a card. She knocked herself, and the old maid let her in, and she climbed the narrow stairs to the front parlor, where Miss Finch sat in a winged armchair, knitting a shawl that would never be worn. "My dear," Miss Finch said, her voice a dry rustle. "You came." "I always come," Eleanor said, sitting on the hard chair beside the fire. Miss Finch did not offer tea. She had no maid to bring it, and she could not manage the tray herself. They simply sat, two women in a quiet room, watching the coals glow. After a long silence, Miss Finch spoke. "I have been thinking about my mother," she said. "She died when I was 16. I remember her at the window, always at the window, watching the street. I asked her once what she was looking for. She said a reason to go out. She never found one." Eleanor nodded. She had heard this story before. She would hear it again. The repetition was not a flaw, it was the point. Some truths required saying over and over, like prayers. "Do you ever wonder," Eleanor said, "what it would be like to be a man?" Miss Finch's needles paused, her eyes, pale blue and watery, fixed on Eleanor's face. "Every day, my dear, every single day. And then I remember that I am not one. And I go back to my knitting. The wool does not care what I think." Eleanor stayed for an hour. When she left, she felt no better and no worse. That, she supposed, was the definition of a friendship between women in her world, the absence of harm, the invisible labor, the management of misery. Thursday was the day for the poor. Once a week, Eleanor put on her oldest walking dress, a brown serge that had been fashionable 3 years ago, and walked to the parish workhouse. The walk was only half a mile, but it crossed an invisible border. On one side of the street, the houses were clean, the windows polished, the servants visible in their uniforms. On the other side, the bricks were stained with damp. The windows were broken and patched with board, and the children ran barefoot through mud that smelled of sewage. The workhouse was a gray stone building, designed to look like a barracks or a prison. It had been built 30 years ago at the height of the reform movement by men who believed that poverty was a moral failure and that the poor must be made uncomfortable enough to desire improvement. Eleanor had read the pamphlets. She had read the poor law reports. She had stood in the cold, damp wards and watched old women die of consumption while the governor explained that he could not afford more coal. She was not allowed to give them money. She was not allowed to give them food, except through the official channels. She was not allowed to take them into her home, or to adopt their children, or to do anything that might disrupt the careful hierarchy of charity. She was allowed to visit. She was allowed to pray with them. She was allowed to distribute small, useless gifts, a handkerchief, a bar of soap, a copy of a religious tract. Today, she carried a basket of tracts. The governor, Mr. Grimes, met her at the door. He was a small, precise man with a mustache that looked like a dead caterpillar. He disliked Eleanor because she asked questions he could not answer without revealing the truth about the workhouse, that it was not a place of reform, but a place of storage, where the poor were kept until they died or escaped. "Mrs. Hardwick," he said, bowing stiffly, "your usual room is prepared." "Thank you, Mr. Grimes." She followed him down a long corridor. The walls were whitewashed, the floor was stone. The air smelled of carbolic soap and boiled cabbage and something else, something sweet and rotten that she had learned to identify as the smell of untreated infection. The women's ward was at the end of the hall. A heavy door swung open, and Eleanor stepped inside. 20 beds, 20 women. Some were old, their faces crumpled like paper. Some were young, their faces still smooth, but their eyes already ancient. Some were ill, coughing into rags. Some were merely tired, their hands folded on their chests as if they were already in their coffins. Eleanor sat on a wooden stool in the center of the room. She opened her basket. She took out a tract. She began to read aloud. "The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want." The women listened. Some closed their eyes. Some stared at the ceiling. Some mouthed the words along with her, their lips moving silently. She read the entire psalm, then another, then a chapter from the book of Job. Her choice, not the governor's. Job was a man who had lost everything, who had sat in ashes and scraped his sores with a piece of pottery, who had demanded an explanation from God and received only a whirlwind. Eleanor thought the women of the workhouse understood Job better than any bishop. When she finished reading, she distributed the tracts. Each woman took one mechanically, tucking it under her pillow or into her apron. Then Eleanor did the thing that Mr. Grimes did not know about. She reached into the bottom of her basket, beneath the tracts, and pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside were 20 three-penny pieces, one for each woman. She moved from bed to bed, pressing a coin into each palm. "Buy yourself something warm," she whispered to each one, "or something sweet." The old women cried. The young women nodded grimly. One woman, a girl, really no more than 17, her belly swollen with pregnancy, gripped Eleanor's hand. "Take me with you," she whispered. "Please, I can work. I can scrub floors. I can do anything." Eleanor looked at the girl's face. She saw hunger there, and fear, and a desperate, blazing hope. She saw herself 20 years ago, before the corset and the calling cards and the silent dinners. She saw a version of her own life that had taken a different turn. A father who drank instead of a father who prospered. A mother who died instead of a mother who disappeared into laudanum. "I cannot," Eleanor said, and the words tasted like poison. She finished her rounds. She walked back through the gray corridors, past the governor's office, out a stream into the street. The air outside was cold and damp, but it was fresh, and she breathed it in great, greedy gasps. She walked home quickly, her brown serge skirts brushing the pavement, her gloved hands clenched at her sides. When she reached Belgrave Square, she paused at the garden gate. The square was quiet. The plane trees were beginning to leaf, pale green against the gray sky. A nanny pushed a perambulator along the gravel path. A gentleman in a top hat walked his dog. Everything was orderly, proper, respectable. Eleanor looked at her own house, the red brick, the white steps, the brass knocker polished to a mirror shine. She thought of the 17-year-old girl in the workhouse, her belly swollen, her hand clutching. She thought of the three-penny piece still warm from her own palm. "Contain yourself," she thought. "Hold yourself in." She walked up the steps. The door opened. The butler, a tall, silent man named Reeves, took her cloak and her bonnet. "Is Mr. Hardwick at home?" she asked. "No, ma'am. He sent word that he will dine at his club." "Then I will dine in my room." "Very good, ma'am." She climbed the stairs. The corset was tight. The stairs were many. At the top she paused, one hand on the banister, and looked down the long corridor of closed doors. Behind each door was a room. Behind each room was a duty. Behind each duty was a silence. She went into her bedroom. She locked the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, still in her brown serge dress, and she wept. Not the graceful, decorative weeping of a heroine in a novel. The ugly, snotty, gasping weeping of a woman who has no words left. She wept until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw. Then she stopped. She washed her face in the basin. She called for Mary. She put on the green silk dress for the dinner that Arthur would not attend, and she went downstairs to eat a cold meal alone at a table that could seat 16. The husband's return. Arthur came home at 11 o'clock. Eleanor heard him in the hall, the thud of his cane, the murmur of his voice giving orders to Reeves, the heavy tread of his feet on the stairs. She was in the drawing room pretending to read a novel. The novel was upside down. She did not turn it right side up. He appeared in the doorway. He had removed his coat and his cravat. His face was flushed from the brandy he had drunk at his club. He looked at her, and for a moment, a single, flickering moment, she saw something in his eyes that might have been guilt. Or perhaps it was merely indigestion. "You are still awake," he said. "I was waiting for you." "No need." He crossed the room and poured himself a brandy from the decanter on the sideboard. He did not offer her one. She did not want one. She wanted to scream. "How was the club?" she asked. "Dull. Same talk, same men, same opinions." "What opinions were those?" He looked at her with mild surprise. She rarely asked him to elaborate. "Oh, the usual. The Irish are troublesome. The Americans are vulgar. The working classes are ungrateful. Women are..." He stopped. He glanced at her. "Well, you know." "No," Eleanor said. "Tell me. What are women?" Arthur stared at her. The brandy in his glass caught the light. "You are tired," he said. "You should go to bed." "I am not tired. I am asking a question. What are women?" He set down his glass. He walked toward her, and she felt the old, familiar shrinking, the way her body folded inward when he came close, as if anticipating a blow that never came. He stopped a foot away from her chair. He looked down at her. "Women," he said, "are the angels of the hearth. They are the light of the home. They are the gentle, tender, nurturing souls who make civilization possible. Without women, we would be brutes." Eleanor looked up at him. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "And what are men?" He smiled. It was a kind smile, she thought. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who had never been required to consider the possibility that he might be wrong. "Men," he said, "are the protectors, the providers, the ones who go out into the rough world and bring back the means of survival. It is a partnership, Eleanor, a sacred partnership, a partnership in which one partner owns the other," she said. The smile froze. "That is not... I do not own you." "The law says you do. My property is yours. My body is yours. My children, if I have them, are yours. I cannot sign a contract. I cannot sue. I cannot vote. I cannot even leave this house without your permission." Arthur's face hardened. He was not used to being contradicted. He was not used to hearing the laws of England described as anything other than divine providence. "Where is this coming from?" he asked. "Have you been reading those pamphlets again? The ones from the suffragettes?" "I have been reading the law," Eleanor said, "and I have been looking at my life, and I have been wondering what it is for." "It is for being my wife," Arthur said. "That is what it is for. And a damn good one, too. You have a beautiful home, you have servants, you have social position. You have everything a woman could want." Eleanor stood up. The novel, The Vicar of Wakefield, still upside down, fell to the floor. She and Arthur stood face to face. She was tall for a woman, but he was taller. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. "I want a key to the library," she said. "I want to be allowed to read the newspapers. I want to be allowed to attend a lecture without asking your permission. I want to be allowed to have an opinion about something other than the menu." Arthur blinked. "The library is not locked. The library is full of your books. I want my own books. I want to buy them with my own money. I want to spend an afternoon reading without being told that I am neglecting my duties. Your duties are... I know what my duties are. I perform them. Every day. Perfectly. I manage a household of 12 servants. I keep accounts that would make your bank manager weep with gratitude. I make calls to women who despise me. I visit a workhouse where people are dying of neglect. I wear a corset that compresses my internal organs. I smile when I want to scream. I am silent when I want to shout. And I am so tired, Arthur. I am so tired of being an angel." The silence in the room was absolute. The fire crackled. The clock ticked. Arthur's face cycled through a series of expressions. Confusion, then irritation, then a kind of wary calculation. He was not a stupid man. He was a conventional one, and he was beginning to understand that his wife, his quiet, compliant Eleanor, was not quite what he had thought. "What do you want?" he asked. The question was not generous. It was tactical. He was trying to find the edges of her rebellion, to see how far it extended. Eleanor thought about it. She thought about the 17-year-old girl in the workhouse. She thought about Miss Finch in her wing chair. She thought about her mother, who had died of a fever at 42, leaving behind nothing but a sewing box and a set of monogrammed handkerchiefs. "I want a room of my own," she said, "with a lock on the door, and I want you to knock before you enter." Arthur laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, more surprise than amusement. "That is all? A room? That is the beginning." He studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up his brandy glass, drained it, and set it down on the sideboard with a decisive click. "You may have the small bedroom at the end of the hall, the one we use for storage. Clear it out yourself. I will not pay for a decorator. I do not need a decorator, and I will knock. But Eleanor..." He stepped closer and his voice dropped. "Do not mistake my permission for weakness. You are my wife. You belong to me. A room does not change that." He left. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, the closing of his bedroom door. She stood alone in the drawing room, surrounded by the evidence of her own success. The silk curtains, the Persian carpet, the oil paintings of ancestors she had never met. She had won something. A small bedroom, a lock. The right to be knocked for. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was a door, and she had opened it, a crack. The room of one's own. The small bedroom at the end of the hall had been used for storage since before Eleanor married Arthur. It contained, she discovered the next morning, the following items: a broken rocking horse, a trunk of old linens moth-eaten, a set of golf clubs. Arthur had tried golf once and abandoned it. A hat stand with 6 hats, all belonging to Arthur's late mother. A crate of dusty book sermons and almanacs. A box of Christmas decorations tarnished, and a mouse skeleton. Eleanor spent the afternoon clearing it out. She did not ask Mary for help. She wanted to do it herself. She wanted to feel her own muscles strain, her own breath come short, her own hands grow rough with work. It was a small rebellion, but it was real. She carried the rocking horse down to the attic. She carried the trunk down to the basement, where Mrs. Pemberton would decide whether the linens could be cut into dusters. She carried the golf clubs to the garden shed. She carried the hats to the attic. She carried the books to the library, though she knew Arthur would never read a sermon. She carried the Christmas decorations to the attic. She swept the mouse skeleton into a dustpan and buried it in the garden under the rose bush. By evening, the room was empty. The walls were papered in a faded floral pattern, once cheerful, now merely tired. The window looked out over the back garden, a small square of lawn and flower beds enclosed by a brick wall. The floor was bare boards, scarred by years of neglect. Eleanor brought her own things, a small writing desk from the morning room, a wooden chair, a brass candle holder, a woolen blanket, a pillow. She brought the copy of Jane Eyre from the bottom of her wardrobe. She brought a blank journal and a pencil. She brought a single photograph, not of Arthur, but of her mother, taken shortly before her death. A young woman in a high-necked dress, her hair piled elaborately, her expression unreadable. She arranged the furniture. She lit the candle. She sat in the chair with the blanket over her knees, and she looked out the window at the darkening garden. The room was cold. The room was small. The room smelled of dust and mouse. It was hers. She opened the journal and wrote, "I have a room. It is not much, but it is the first thing I have owned in 7 years of marriage. Arthur does not understand why I wanted it. He thinks it is a woman's whim, like a new hat or a piece of jewelry. He does not know that I am building a fortress, brick by brick, word by word." She wrote until the candle burned low. Then she blew it out and sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. The creak of the stairs, the murmur of the servants finishing their work, the distant rumble of a carriage on the square. She had never felt less alone. The architecture of silence. The other women. The house on Belgrave Square contained 12 servants. Eleanor knew their names, their wages, their histories, their secrets. She had hired some of them. She had dismissed others. She had watched them marry, bear children, sicken, and sometimes die. And she had learned over the years that the servants' hall was a mirror of the drawing room, hierarchical, judgmental, and brutally efficient at crushing anyone who stepped out of line. The housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, was the queen of the basement. She ruled through a combination of fear and competence. The cook, Mrs. Briggs, was her uneasy ally, a woman of immense girth and immense talent who could produce a 7-course dinner for 20 guests while weeping silently over the death of her only son in a factory accident. The butler, Reeves, was a former soldier who had learned to make himself invisible. The footmen, William and Thomas, were young, strong, and given to long, complicated silences. The maids, Alice, Bessie, and the new girl, Lucy, were a chorus of whispers and rustling skirts. Eleanor knew that they watched her. They watched her eat, dress, walk, speak, sleep. They noted the tone of her voice when she spoke to Arthur. They counted the number of times she went to the small room at the end of the hall. They reported to each other in the language of sidelong glances and half-finished sentences, the state of the marriage, the state of her health, the state of her mind. She was not paranoid. She was simply a Victorian woman, and she understood that her life was not her own. The servants were not her enemies. They were her witnesses. And sometimes, in the dark hours between midnight and dawn, they were her only confidants. One night, unable to sleep, Eleanor walked down to the kitchen. She wore a dressing gown over her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She knew the servants would be in bed, but the kitchen was always warm, the range banked for the night, the embers glowing. She went to the pantry, found a loaf of bread, and cut herself a slice. She was eating it standing up, leaning against the table when she heard a sound, a small, muffled sob. She followed it to the scullery, a narrow room off the kitchen where the pots were washed. The new girl, Lucy, was sitting on an upturned bucket, her face in her hands. "Lucy," Eleanor said, "what is wrong?" The girl looked up, startled. Her eyes were red, her apron was wet. "Oh, ma'am, I am sorry. I did not mean to. I will go back to bed directly." "No." Eleanor sat down on a second bucket, facing the girl. "Tell me." Lucy hesitated. The rules were clear. Servants did not confide in mistresses. But the hour was late, the kitchen was dark, and the girl was very young. No more than 15, Eleanor guessed, though the workhouse had taught her that poverty aged children in invisible ways. "It is my mother, ma'am," Lucy whispered. "She is sick. The doctor says it is her lungs. She cannot work. And my father, he drinks. He drinks everything. There is no money for food, let alone medicine. I send them what I can, but Mrs. Pemberton deducts my wages for breakages, and I broke a plate last week, and the cost of the plate was more than I could." She broke down. Eleanor sat on the bucket and watched the girl cry. She did not offer comfort. She knew that comfort was a luxury, and that what Lucy needed was not sympathy, but action. She waited until the sobs subsided. "How much?" Eleanor asked. "Ma'am? How much do you need for the doctor, for the medicine?" Lucy's face crumpled. "I cannot ask you for. It is not proper. Mrs. Pemberton said I must never. Mrs. Pemberton does not need to know." Eleanor reached into the pocket of her dressing gown. She had no money there. It was a dressing gown, after all. But she had her wedding ring. She pulled it off, a simple gold band, and pressed it into Lucy's palm. "Take this to the pawn shop on Berwick Street. They will give you £1. Use it for your mother. When you can, you will buy it back. But do not worry about that now." Lucy stared at the ring. Her hand was shaking. "Ma'am," she whispered, "your wedding ring. Mr. Hardwick will not notice. He has not looked at my hands in years." It was true, and it was a lie. Arthur had looked at her hands on their wedding day, had slid the ring onto her finger with a smile that she had mistaken for love. Now she was giving it away to a servant girl, and she felt nothing but a cold, clear certainty that the ring had never belonged to her anyway. It had belonged to Mrs. Arthur Hardwick. And Eleanor was not sure anymore who that was. Lucy tucked the ring into her bodice. She stood up, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and curtsied. "Thank you, ma'am. I will never forget this. Never. Go to bed, Lucy, And do not tell anyone about this, not even your mother." The girl nodded and disappeared up the back stairs. Eleanor sat alone in the dark kitchen, her finger bare, her slice of bread forgotten on the table. She thought about the things women gave away: rings, money, time, bodies, dreams. They gave, and the world took and took. And at the end, what was left? A small room at the end of the hall, a journal with a few pages filled. She went back upstairs. She did not sleep. She sat in her small room, watching the sky turn from black to gray, and she wrote in her journal, "I have given away my wedding ring." It felt like throwing a stone into a river. I watched it sink, and I was glad. The dinner party Saturday night, the dinner for 8. Eleanor had been preparing for this evening for 3 days. The menu had been approved, the wine selected, the flowers arranged, the silver polished, the china counted, the seating plan debated with Mrs. Pemberton, the guests confirmed and reconfirmed. She had chosen the green silk dress, the one Arthur liked, because she had learned that small concessions made the larger battles possible. The guests arrived at 7:30. Lord and Lady Ashworth, the Dowager Countess's son, and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Charles Bellingham, Sir Edward and Lady Margaret Graves, and a Mr. Frederick Drummond, a bachelor recently returned from India, whose fortune was rumored to be immense. Eleanor had seated Mr. Drummond between herself and Lady Ashworth, a strategic placement designed to allow him to be entertained without being overwhelmed. The ritual began in the drawing room. Champagne was served. Conversation flowed in familiar channels. The weather too cold for April. The Queen still in mourning. Still reclusive, the Irish question troublesome, the American question vulgar. The servant question insolent. Eleanor smiled, nodded, interjected the occasional "indeed" or "how fascinating." She watched Arthur perform the role of host, charming, attentive, the picture of a prosperous Victorian gentleman. Dinner was announced. They processed into the dining room in order of precedence. Eleanor took her place at the foot of the table, opposite Arthur at the head. The soup was served, a clear consommé, delicate and perfect. The fish followed, sole in a lobster sauce. The entree, sweetbreads in a mushroom vol au vent. The roast, a haunch of venison carved by Arthur with ceremonial gravity. The sweets, a trifle, a jelly, a compote of pears. The savories, anchovy toast, deviled kidneys. The cheese, Stilton with port. Between courses, the conversation continued. Eleanor listened to Lord Ashworth discuss the decline of British agriculture. She listened to Lady Ashworth discuss the difficulty of finding a good governess. She listened to Sir Edward discuss the need for a stronger navy. She listened to Lady Margaret discuss the scandalous hemlines of the new walking dresses. And then Mr. Drummond turned to her. "Mrs. Hardwicke," he said. He was a handsome man in a sun-browned colonial way. His eyes were very blue. "I am told you are something of an expert on the poor laws." The table went quiet. Eleanor felt Arthur's gaze on her, sharp as a blade. She had not told him about her visits to the workhouse. He knew, of course. She had his permission. But he did not like to speak of it. The poor were not a suitable topic for a dinner party. "I am no expert, Mr. Drummond," she said carefully. "I merely visit the parish workhouse once a week." "And what do you observe there?" The question was genuine. He was not mocking her. He was interested. Eleanor felt a small, dangerous thrill. "I observe that the poor law is not working," she said. "The workhouses are overcrowded, underfunded, and staffed by men who see the poor as a moral failure rather than a social problem. The old die of neglect, the young die of despair, and the able-bodied are given tasks designed to humiliate, not to rehabilitate. Mr. Drummond nodded slowly. In India, we have similar problems. The famine, the caste system, Frederick? Arthur interrupted, his voice genial but firm. Surely we need not bore the ladies with such matters. Mrs. Hardwick's charitable work is admirable, but she would be the first to admit that she lacks the education to understand the economic complexities of the poor law. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap. She felt the green silk of her dress pull tight across her knees. She looked at Arthur. He smiled at her, a warning smile, a be quiet smile. Mr. Drummond looked from Arthur to Eleanor. Something passed across his face, recognition perhaps, or pity. I beg your pardon, he said. Mrs. Hardwick, would you do me the honor of showing me your garden tomorrow? The roses must be coming into bloom. The change of subject was so abrupt that no one could object. Arthur's smile tightened. Of course, he said. Eleanor will be delighted. The dinner continued. The cheese was served. The port was passed. The ladies withdrew to the drawing room, leaving the gentlemen to their cigars and their conversation about things that mattered. Eleanor led the procession, her green silk rustling, her spine straight, her face composed. In the drawing room, the women sat in a circle of velvet and silk. They talked of children, servants, fashions, scandals. Lady Ashworth complained about her cook. Mrs. Bellingham complained about her husband's snoring. Lady Margaret complained about the price of ostrich feathers. Eleanor sat among them, silent. She was thinking about Mr. Drummond's eyes. Not because she found him attractive, she did, but that was irrelevant. She was thinking because he had looked at her and seen a person. He had asked her a question and waited for an answer. He had not assumed that her opinion was worthless because she was a woman. Careful, she told herself. Careful. You are Mrs. Arthur Hardwick. You belong to him. A few kind words from a stranger do not change that. But the kind words stayed with her. They echoed in her mind as she poured tea. They echoed as she listened to Lady Ashworth describe the new bishop's wife. They echoed as the gentlemen rejoined them, smelling of smoke and brandy, and the evening drew to a close. Mr. Drummond said good night to her last. He took her hand, gloved, white kid, and bowed over it. Thank you for a most enlightening conversation, Mrs. Hardwick, he said. I hope we may continue it tomorrow, in the garden. I hope so too, Eleanor said. She felt Arthur's hand on her elbow, proprietary and firm. She felt herself being steered away, toward the door, toward the stairs, toward the bedroom where she would lie awake and think about blue eyes and genuine questions and the dangerous possibility of being seen. The garden was small, rectangular, enclosed by a brick wall that had been whitewashed to reflect the light. A gravel path ran down the center, flanked by rose bushes and lavender. At the far end, a wooden bench faced a small fountain, a stone cherub whose water spout had been blocked by limescale for the past 3 years. Mr. Drummond arrived at 10:30. Eleanor met him at the garden gate, wearing a simple cotton dress and a straw hat. No corset. It was her morning, and she had decided to breathe. You are very brave, he said, opening the gate for her, to talk about the poor law in front of your husband. I am not brave, Eleanor said. I am foolish. There is a difference. They walked along the gravel path. The roses were not yet blooming, but the lavender was showing small purple buds. The morning was warm, the sky a pale, washed-out blue. "In India," Mr. Drummond said, "I saw things that would make your workhouse look like a palace. Starvation, disease, children dying in the street while their mothers watched. And no one did anything because the system was designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many." Eleanor stopped walking. She turned to face him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked a question at dinner. You wanted to know about the poor law, and no one gave you an answer." "My husband gave me an answer. He said I lacked the education to understand." Mr. Drummond's face hardened. "Your husband is a fool." Eleanor laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You cannot say that. He is my husband." "I am not your husband. I am a stranger who has known you for less than 12 hours, and I can see that you are intelligent, curious, and trapped. The poor law is not complicated. It is simple. It is theft. The rich steal from the poor, and then they blame the poor for being poor. Your husband knows this. Every gentleman in that dining room knows this. And they will never, ever admit it, because to admit it would be to admit that they are thieves." Eleanor sat down on the bench. The stone cherub dribbled water onto the gravel. She watched the drops fall and thought about what he had said. "If I admitted that," she said slowly, "I would have to admit that I am a thief too. I live in this house. I wear this dress. I eat this food. I do not earn any of it. I am kept like a pet." "You are not a pet," Mr. Drummond said. He sat down beside her, not too close. "You are a hostage, and the first step to escape is to name the prison." They sat in silence for a long time. The birds sang. The fountain dribbled. The sun climbed higher. Eleanor thought about her journal, hidden in the small room at the end of the hall. She thought about the 17-year-old girl in the workhouse. She thought about Lucy's mother dying of consumption because she could not afford a doctor. "What do I do?" she asked. The question was not addressed to Mr. Drummond. It was addressed to the world, to God, to the stone cherub. But he answered anyway. "You learn," he said. "You read, you write, you find others who think as you do. You build a life inside the life you have been given. And when the moment comes, if it comes, you are ready." "Ready for what?" He looked at her. His blue eyes were serious, kind, and utterly without hope. "Ready to be free, or ready to endure? Both require the same preparation." He left at noon. Eleanor watched him go through the garden gate, down the mews, around the corner. She sat on the bench for another hour, watching the cherub dribble. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and wrote in her journal, "Today a man told me that I am a hostage. He is right. But I have begun to wonder, who is the jailer? Is it Arthur? Is it the law? Is it the corset? Or is it me? What if I simply stopped playing the game? What if I stopped smiling, stopped nodding, stopped pretending? What would happen then?" She did not write the answer. She did not need to. She knew. The world would crush her. It had crushed thousands of women before her. It would crush thousands after. But perhaps, it would leave a small, crushed space where another woman could see the shape of her own rebellion. That, she wrote, will have to be enough. The Unraveling the Doctor's Opinion. 3 weeks later, Eleanor collapsed. It was not a dramatic collapse. She was not discovered in a swoon on the drawing room carpet. She simply woke up one morning and could not move. Her limbs were heavy, her head was foggy, Her chest felt as if it were filled with wet sand. Mary called for Mrs. Pemberton. Mrs. Pemberton called for the doctor. The doctor, a thin, bearded man named Dr. Holloway, arrived within the hour. He examined Eleanor in her bedroom. He listened to her heart, her lungs, her stomach. He checked her pulse, her tongue, her eyes. He asked questions about her appetite, her sleep, her menses. He did not ask about her marriage, her workhouse visits, her small room, her journal. Those things were not medical matters. Nervous exhaustion, Dr. Holloway announced. The female constitution is delicate. Mrs. Hardwick has been overexerting herself. Too much mental activity, too much social obligation. The womb is a mysterious organ, and when it is overstimulated, the entire system suffers. Arthur stood by the window, his face a mask of concern. What is the treatment? Rest, complete rest. No reading, no writing, no conversation beyond the necessary. A light diet, gentle exercise in the fresh air, and, this is essential, no emotional excitement. Mrs. Hardwick must be shielded from anything that might agitate her nerves. Eleanor lay in the bed listening. She wanted to laugh. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Dr. Holloway that her womb was perfectly fine. Thank you. And that the problem was not her nerves, but her life. But she was too tired. The wet sand in her chest had spread to her limbs, her head, her tongue. She could not form the words. I will write a prescription for a mild sedative, Dr. Holloway continued. Laudanum in small doses. It will help her sleep. And, Mr. Hardwick, I recommend that you remove any sources of mental strain, books, newspapers, letters, from friends who might discuss upsetting topics. A woman in Mrs. Hardwick's condition must be treated like a hothouse flower. Too much sun, and she wilts. Arthur nodded gravely. I will see to it. The doctor left. Arthur stood by the bed looking down at Eleanor. His expression was unreadable. You heard him, he said. Rest, no reading, no writing. Arthur, no arguments, Eleanor. This is for your own good. He left. The door closed. Eleanor lay in the bed staring at the canopy. She thought about her journal, hidden in the small room at the end of the hall. She thought about the key to that room, which she kept on a ribbon around her neck, under her nightdress. She thought about the words she had written, the only honest words in the house. He will find them, she thought. He will take them. He will burn them. And then I will truly be silent. She reached under her nightdress and touched the key. It was cold against her skin. She closed her eyes and tried to think of nothing. The laudanum would come soon. It would blur the edges of her mind, soften the sharp corners of her thoughts. She would sleep. She would dream. And when she woke, she would be Mrs. Arthur Hardwick. Again, polite, composed, empty. But first she had one thing to do. She waited until the house was quiet. The servants were in the basement preparing dinner. Arthur was in his study, writing letters. Eleanor pushed herself out of bed, swaying. Her legs were unsteady, but they held. She walked, slowly, clinging to the wall to the small room at the end of the hall. She unlocked the door. She went inside. She took the journal from its hiding place under the floorboard, the loose board she had discovered on her second day. She tucked the journal into the waistband of her nightdress under her dressing gown. She locked the room. She walked back to her bed. She hid the journal under the mattress. Then she lay down and waited for the laudanum, the silence. The days that followed were a blur of gray. Eleanor lay in bed while Mary fed her broth and sponge cake. She lay in bed while Mrs. Pemberton changed the linens and plumped the pillows. She lay in bed while Arthur came and went, checking on her like a farmer checking on a sick cow. She did not read. She did not write. She did not speak unless spoken to. The laudanum helped. It smoothed the rough edges of her thoughts. It made the hours pass without pain. It also made her dream, strange, vivid dreams, in which she was walking through a field of poppies, their red petals brushing against her bare arms. In the dream, she was not Mrs. Arthur Hardwick. She was simply Eleanor. She was free. And then she woke, and the weight of her life settled back onto her chest, and she reached under the mattress to make sure the journal was still there. Lucy came to see her. The girl stood in the doorway, twisting her apron in her hands. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I wanted to thank you again for the ring. My mother is better. The doctor came.
He gave her medicine. She is sitting up now. She asked about you." Eleanor smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had produced in weeks. "I am glad, Lucy. Tell your mother I'm thinking of her." "I will, ma'am." Lucy hesitated. "Ma'am, Mr. Hardwick, he asked me about the ring.
He noticed it was missing. I said I did not know. He did not believe me." Eleanor's heart clenched. "What did he say?" "He said he would find out. He said servants who steal are sent to prison." "You did not steal, Lucy. I gave you the ring." "He will not believe that, ma'am. He will think I lied. He will think you are covering for me." Eleanor closed her eyes. The wet sand was back. "Go, Lucy, and do not worry. I will protect you." The girl left. Eleanor lay in the darkening room, listening to the house settle. Arthur would confront her. It was only a matter of time. He would demand to know where the ring had gone. She would tell him the truth. He would not believe her. He would search the house. He would find the journal. He would read the words she had written. "I have given away my wedding ring." It felt like throwing a stone into a river. I was glad. And then, she did not know. She had never known. That was the terror and the freedom of it. She had spent her entire life knowing exactly what would happen next. The calls, the dinners, the silent mornings, the emptier nights. Now, for the first time, the future was a blank page. She could write anything, or nothing. She reached under the mattress. She pulled out the journal. She opened it to a fresh page. She dipped the pencil in the cup of water by her bed. There was no ink, but the pencil would do. She wrote, "I am ready, whatever comes." He came at midnight. Eleanor was not sleeping. She had stopped taking the laudanum 2 days ago, hiding the bottle under the mattress beside her journal. The withdrawal had been brutal, sweating, shaking. Dreams that were not dreams but memories. But she was awake. She was clear. She was ready. Arthur did not knock. He opened the door and stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the gaslight from the hall. He was holding something in his hand, a piece of paper. "I found this," he said, "in the small room, hidden under the floorboard." Eleanor sat up. The journal was under her pillow. She had been too weak to hide it properly. She had thought she had more time. "What is it?" she asked, though she knew. "A list, your list. Things I am not permitted to say." He read aloud, his voice flat and hard. "I am lonely. I am angry. I am not certain I want to have children. I have not touched my husband's hand with affection in 2 years. I am cleverer than he is. I am afraid that my mind is dying, slowly, from lack of use." He crumpled the paper. His face was white.
Is this how you spend your time? Writing lies about me? They are not lies, Eleanor said. Her voice was steady. They are the truth. You have never asked for the truth, Arthur. You have never wanted it. You wanted a wife who would smile and nod and manage your household and bear your children, and I have done everything except bear your children. And you have never once asked me what I wanted. What you want? He stepped into the room. The door swung shut behind him. They were alone in the dark. You are my wife. Your wants are my wants. That is the contract. No, Eleanor said. That is the prison. Arthur stared at her. He was not a violent man. She had never been afraid that he would hit her. But there were other kinds of violence, the violence of silence, the violence of control, the violence of a man who believes with every fiber of his being that he has the right to own another human being. Where is the ring? He asked. I gave it away. To whom? That does not matter. It matters to me. That ring cost 50 guineas. It was my mother's. It is a family heirloom. Eleanor laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. Your mother hated that ring. She told me so. She said it was too heavy, too gaudy, a symbol of everything she despised about your father. She wore it because she had to. Just as I wore it because I had to. And now it is gone. And I am glad. Arthur's hand moved. For a moment Eleanor thought he would strike her, but he did not. He opened the door instead. You are ill, he said. You are not yourself. Dr. Holloway was right. Your nerves are shattered. I am sending for a specialist. A man who treats women with your condition. You will do exactly as he says. You will not argue. You will not write. You will not read. You will lie in this bed, and you will rest until you are well. And when you are well, we will never speak of this again. He left. The door closed. The lock turned. Eleanor sat in the dark. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the journal. She held it to her chest, like a child. She had no candle. She could not write, but she did not need to. The words were already there, in her mind, in her blood, in the small, stubborn place that Arthur could never reach. I am ready, she thought. I am ready. I am ready. The awakening. The specialist Dr. Silas Meridew was a tall, thin man with a gray beard and the cold, assessing eyes of a butcher examining a side of beef. He arrived at Belgrave Square on a Tuesday, accompanied by a nurse, a stout, silent woman in a starched white cap. They took over Eleanor's bedroom as if it were a hospital ward. The nurse removed the flowers from the nightstand, the photograph of Eleanor's mother from the mantel, the lace curtains from the windows. Everything soft was replaced by everything hard. The room smelled of carbolic soap and authority. Dr. Meridew examined Eleanor in the same way Dr. Holloway had examined her: pulse, tongue, eyes, questions about her menses. But he added something new. He asked about her dreams. He asked about her childhood. He asked about her relationship with her mother, her father, her husband, and then he sat back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and pronounced his diagnosis. Hysteria, he said. A classic case. The uterus has become displaced, pressing against the nerves and causing a cascade of symptoms: fatigue, melancholy, irritability, morbid thoughts. The condition is common among women of Mrs. Hardwick's class. Too much leisure, too little physical exertion. The mind becomes overactive and the womb rebels. Eleanor lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling. She had read about hysteria. She knew that it was not a real disease, that it was a label applied to any woman who stepped outside the bounds of acceptable behavior.
She knew that the treatment was designed to reinforce those bounds, not to cure anything. "What is the treatment?" she asked. "A course of rest, as Dr. Holloway prescribed, but more rigorous. You will remain in this bed for 6 weeks. You will not sit up. You will not read. You will not write. You will not receive visitors except for your husband. The nurse will attend to your needs. I will visit twice a week to monitor your progress." "And if I refuse?" Dr. Meridew smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Refusal is a symptom, Mrs. Hardwick. It confirms the diagnosis. The more you resist, the more treatment you will require. I have had patients who spent years in bed. I have had patients who were sent to asylums. I do not recommend either outcome." Arthur stood by the window, watching. He had not spoken since the doctor arrived. Now he cleared his throat. "Do whatever is necessary, Dr. Meridew. My wife's health is paramount." "Very good, Mr. Hardwick." They left. The nurse remained. She pulled the curtains closed, plunging the room into twilight. She adjusted Eleanor's pillows, straightened her sheets, and placed a cup of water on the nightstand. Then she sat in the chair by the door, folded her hands, and stared at Eleanor with the blank, patient gaze of a woman who had seen everything and been surprised by nothing. Eleanor closed her eyes. She reached under her pillow, but the journal was gone. The nurse had taken it. She had taken the laudanum bottle, too. She had taken everything except Eleanor's body, and she was watching that body closely, waiting for it to betray its occupant. "I am not hysterical," Eleanor thought. "I am not mad. I am a woman in a cage, and the cage is closing." She lay still. She breathed. She waited. The unseen world. The first week was the hardest. Eleanor's body, accustomed to movement, rebelled against stillness. Her muscles ached. Her joints stiffened. Her head pounded with a dull, persistent pain that the nurse called the adjustment. She was fed bland food, broth, gruel, toast, and given water to drink. No tea, no coffee, no wine. The nurse changed her linens twice a day, bathed her with a sponge, and helped her use the chamber pot. There was no privacy. There was no dignity. There was only the bed, the nurse, and the slow, relentless passage of time. On the third day, Eleanor began to hallucinate. The patterns on the wallpaper, a faded floral, like the paper in her small room, began to move. The flowers twisted, stretched, opened their petals to reveal dark, staring eyes. The ceiling rippled like water. The nurse's face shifted, became her mother's face, became Lucy's face, became the face of the 17-year-old girl in the workhouse. "You are seeing things," the nurse said. "It is normal. Your mind is healing." "My mind is dying," Eleanor thought. "You are killing it, slowly, with kindness." On the 5th day, Arthur came to visit. He sat on the edge of the bed and took her hand. His hand was warm, dry, unfamiliar. She had not touched him in months. She had forgotten what he felt like. "The doctor says you are improving," he said. "I am not improving," Eleanor whispered. "I am disappearing." Arthur's face tightened. "You are being dramatic. It is the hysteria." "It is not hysteria. It is me. I am here, Arthur. I am still here. But you are erasing me. You and the doctor and the nurse, you are turning me into a ghost while I am still alive." He stood up. He looked down at her, and for a moment, a single flickering moment, she saw something in his eyes that might have been fear. Not fear of her.
fear of what she represented, a crack in the wall of his certainty. "Get well, Eleanor," he said. "That is all I ask." He left. The nurse returned to her chair. The wallpaper flowers resumed their slow, silent dance. On the 8th day, Eleanor stopped eating. It was not a decision. It was a necessity. The food they brought her, the gruel, the broth, the toast, tasted like ashes. Her throat closed around each spoonful. She gagged, coughed, spat. The nurse frowned. The doctor was summoned. "A setback," Dr. Meridew said. "The hysteria is deepening. We will begin a new treatment. The rest cure." Eleanor knew about the rest cure. She had read about it in a medical journal, one of the books she had hidden in the small room. The rest cure involved complete isolation, complete immobility, and a diet of milk and raw eggs. It was designed to break the patient's will, to reduce her to a state of infantile dependence. It was, Eleanor had thought at the time, a form of torture disguised as therapy. Now she was going to experience it firsthand. The nurse brought the milk and eggs. Eleanor refused. The nurse held her nose and poured the mixture down her throat. Eleanor choked, swallowed, vomited. The nurse cleaned her up and tried again. This time Eleanor kept it down. The milk was warm. The eggs were slimy. They sat in her stomach like stones. Afterward, Eleanor lay in the dark and thought about the women who had come before her. The women in the workhouse. The women in the asylums. The women who had been labeled hysterical, melancholic, neurasthenic. All the fancy names for the same simple truth. They did not fit. They could not be contained. And the world had responded by breaking them. "I will not break," Eleanor thought. "I will not. I will not. I will not." She repeated it like a prayer, a mantra, a spell. The words echoed in the empty room, bouncing off the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The nurse did not hear them. The doctor did not care, but Eleanor heard, and that, she decided, was enough. On the 15th day, Eleanor had a visitor. She was not expecting anyone. The doctor had forbidden visitors. But the door opened, and a figure slipped inside, small, nervous, wearing the uniform of a housemaid. Lucy. The nurse was asleep. It was the middle of the night, and the nurse, exhausted by her own vigil, had nodded off in the chair. Lucy crept across the room, her bare feet silent on the carpet. "Ma'am," she whispered, "I brought you something." She held out a small object. Eleanor's journal. "I found it in the nurse's room," Lucy said. "She was going to burn it. I took it from the fireplace. I am sorry, it is a little scorched." Eleanor took the journal. The cover was blackened at the edges, but the pages were intact. She held it to her chest, the way she had held it before, and felt something loosen in her chest. A knot she had not known was there. "Thank you, Lucy," she whispered. "Thank you." "Ma'am," Lucy said, her voice urgent. "You must get out of here. The doctor, he is talking about sending you to a place, an asylum. He said your case is too severe for home treatment. Mr. Hardwick is considering it." Eleanor's blood went cold. She had heard stories about asylums, women who went in and never came out, women who were locked in padded rooms, strapped to beds, subjected to treatments that were not treatments but punishments, women who were inconvenient, too loud, too clever, and too rebellious, and were disappeared. "How?" she asked. "How do I get out?" Lucy glanced at the sleeping nurse. "The garden door. It is not locked. I checked. If you can get down the stairs through the kitchen out the back." "I cannot walk. I have been in this bed for 2 weeks. My legs will not hold me." "Then crawl," Lucy said. "Crawl if you have to, but go, ma'am. Go now. I will keep the nurse asleep as long as I can." Lucy pressed something else into Eleanor's hand. A key. The key to the garden door. Then she was gone. Eleanor lay in the bed, the journal in one hand, the key in the other. Her body was weak, her legs were like water, her head was spinning. But her mind was clear. The fog of the laudanum, the exhaustion, the despair, all of it had burned away in the heat of this single, impossible possibility. Crawl, she thought. Crawl if you have to. She pushed back the covers. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. The room tilted. She gripped the mattress, waiting for the tilt to subside. Then she stood. Her legs buckled. She fell to the floor, the journal skidding across the carpet. She crawled after it, retrieved it, tucked it into the waistband of her nightdress. She crawled to the door. She pulled herself up. Using the door frame, she opened the door. The hallway was dark. She crawled down the hallway, her knees scraping the carpet. She reached the top of the stairs. The stairs were steep, narrow, a cascade of darkness. She could not crawl downstairs. She would fall. She would break her neck. She sat on the top step and pushed herself forward, sliding down on her bottom, one step at a time. The wood was cold. The edges bit into her thighs. She counted each step as she descended, 10, 20, 30. The staircase seemed to go on forever. At the bottom, she pulled herself to her feet again. The kitchen was to the left, through a swinging door. She pushed through the door, stumbled across the stone floor, and found the garden door. Her hands shook as she fitted the key into the lock. It turned. The door opened. Cold air rushed in. It smelled of earth, of dew, of freedom. Eleanor stepped outside. The garden was dark, the stars hidden behind clouds. The stone cherub dribbled its endless water. The roses were blooming now. She could smell them, a sweet, heavy perfume. She walked, stumbled really, down the gravel path towards the gate. The gate was locked, but the key worked there too. She opened the gate. She stepped into the mews. The cobblestones were cold under her bare feet. She had no shoes. She had no coat. She had nothing except the nightdress on her back, the journal at her waist, and the key in her hand. She did not know where she was going. She did not know how she would survive. She did not know if Arthur would come after her, or if the doctor would send the police, or if the world would punish her for the crime of walking away. But she walked. She walked down the mews, toward the street. The gas lamps cast pools of yellow light on the pavement. She walked through the pools, from one to the next, her shadow stretching and shrinking behind her. She walked until Belgrave Square was a memory, until the houses grew smaller and the streets grew darker, until she reached a place she had never seen before. A row of shops, a public house, a woman standing in a doorway, smoking a cigarette. The woman looked at Eleanor. She took in the nightdress, the bare feet, the wild hair, the scorched journal. She did not look surprised. She had seen stranger things, probably in this part of the city. "You lost, love?" the woman asked. Eleanor opened her mouth to say no, but the word would not come. Instead, she said, "Yes, I am lost. I have been lost for 7 years. Can you help me find myself?" The woman stared at her for a long moment. Then she laughed, a short, hard sound. She took a last drag of her cigarette, dropped it to the pavement, and crushed it under her heel. "Come inside," she said. "I'll make you a cup of tea, and then you can tell me everything." Eleanor followed her through the doorway into a small, warm room full of women. They were sitting at tables, playing cards, drinking gin, laughing. They looked up when Eleanor entered. They saw her nightdress, her bare feet, her journal.
And then they looked away, as if a woman in a nightdress was the most ordinary thing in the world. Eleanor sat down in an empty chair. The woman brought her a cup of tea. Strong, sweet, hot. Eleanor wrapped her hands around the cup and let the warmth seep into her bones.
She had escaped. She was free. She was terrified. But she was not alone. The quiet. After Eleanor Hardwick was never found, the newspapers reported her disappearance with the usual mixture of sensationalism and moral judgment. Wife of prominent banker vanishes in night. Foul play suspected. Hysterical woman may have taken her own life. Arthur offered a reward. The police searched. Dr. Meridew gave interviews. The nurse was dismissed, Lucy was questioned and released. The case grew cold. But Eleanor did not die. She did not return to her husband. She simply vanished into the vast, teeming, anonymous city of London. She changed her name, she cut her hair, she found work in a print shop, setting type for a radical newspaper that advocated for women's suffrage, workers' rights, the abolition of the poor law. She lived in a single room, above a bakery, on a street where no one knew her name. She wrote in her journal every night. She read books borrowed from a circulating library. She attended lectures disguised as a man, a hat pulled low, a borrowed coat, a voice lowered to a husky whisper. She was not happy. Happiness was a luxury she could not afford. But she was alive. She was free. And every morning, when she woke in her narrow bed, she touched the empty space on her finger where her wedding ring had been. And she remembered the girl in the workhouse and the old woman in the wing chair and the maid who had stolen a journal from a fire. "This is what freedom looks like," she wrote in her journal on the first anniversary of her escape. "It is not a parade. It is not a banner. It is a small room, a locked door, and the right to think my own thoughts. It is not enough. But it is everything." She closed the journal. She put on her coat. She went downstairs, into the street, into the city, into the world. The world did not welcome her. It did not even see her, but she saw it, all of it. The beauty and the ugliness, the kindness and the cruelty, the endless, impossible struggle of women trying to be free, and she kept walking.